Can you see me? Here I am. Welcome back. As we move on talking about Holy Communion, let me remind you of that pattern that I mentioned. Take, bless, break, and give. Remember that? So now as we move on, I need to remind you of the story of the Passover. I hope you remember it. If not, you should take some time and ask your teachers or parents about the Exodus. It's a very important part of the history of Israel. It's also in our confirmation videos that you may remember. It's the story of Moses and the slaves in Egypt. Anyway, here is a really short version of a really long story. First of all, we remember that Israel had been conquered by Egypt, and they were taken and made into slaves. They were all slaves, the whole nation. And then God chose a man whose name was Moses to set the entire nation free. Moses didn't do the work. God chose him as a servant. And in order to make his point, God sent a whole bunch of plagues on Egypt, and eventually the Pharaoh agreed to let them go. You remember the story. It's a pretty cool story. It's a bit violent, but it's a cool story. It's part of the history, isn't it? So the last plague was an absolutely terrible one. The Spirit of God, the Bible calls it the angel of death, was going to hover over every home and tent in Egypt on an appointed night. The Spirit of God, the angel of death, was going to hover. And when the Spirit of God did that, the firstborn child of every family in Egypt was going to die. The only way to escape this was to make a choice to follow God, to obey God, and to follow God's instructions. And so there was a meal that was to be held on the night that the angel of death was going to hover over the land, and the people had to eat a meal in a certain way, and they had to do certain things. If you did that, God's Spirit would pass over your house, and your firstborn child would be saved. So on the night of Passover, the family had this special meal. In the meal, they explained what was about to happen. And then, in order to protect their firstborn children, a lamb was taken that was part of the meal, and the blood from the lamb was smeared on the doorway of the house as a sign to the angel of death that they were going to obey God. So that's the image. The Israelites took the blood of a lamb that was used for the meal, and they marked the doors so the angel of death would pass over them. Later on in history, that Passover meal would become a very important time for Jewish people. Passover is held every year. You know how we have Christmas every year, we have Easter every year, we have your birthday every year. We have certain things that we do once a year. And Passover is held within a family's house. They speak about it in the churches, of course, but the families gather around the table, and it becomes a time which is almost a mirror of ancient times, where people would share a meal, say prayers, they would sing, tell stories, and this was meant to tell the story of the Exodus over and over and over, so that every generation would learn about it, and it would become part of their lives too. The word for Passover meal is Seder supper. It may be pronounced Seder. Children play a very important role in the Seder supper. They're expected to take part in many of the customs. At one point during the meal, the youngest child in the family asks 4 specific questions. What makes this night so special? And these 4 questions give the parents the opportunity to tell the story of the way God set people in Egypt free. It gives parents a way to tell the story of how God led the people of Israel out of Egypt, through the waters of the Red Sea, and into a land that was promised to them, and they were delivered, they were free, and now they began a whole new life. So we have that storytelling tradition that went on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And my point is this: these are the traditions that Jesus would have known, and they would have been a part of his life. Now, in the next video, you'll notice that these are a bit short. You can watch them all together if you want. That's entirely up to you. In the next video, we're going to talk about what happened when Jesus went to Jerusalem knowing that he was going to die. And when he got there, he celebrated the Passover meal with those who were closest to him, his disciples, and some of his friends. See you soon.